Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I rise today in support of the Peters Amendment to H.R. 3582, the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act of 2011. As we consider legislation that would mandate the Congressional Budget Office use dynamic scoring to evaluate the macroeconomic impact of large tax cuts, we literally cannot afford to ignore the lessons of the past decade. My Republican colleagues want to enact this seemingly subtle change so that they can more easily advance their agenda of tax cuts for the rich while slashing critical programs that American families and workers rely on each and every day. Dynamic scoring supporters back this legislation in large part because it can mask the cost of tax cuts while ignoring the multiplier effects that investments in education, public health, and infrastructure can provide. In order to evaluate these claims, we need only look at the claims made by those who supported the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts and see how they stack up next to reality. Despite pledges from the Bush administration that the tax cuts of 2001 and 2003 would generate such significant economic activity that they would pay for themselves, we know that this is not the case. This is why I have put forward an amendment that will simply add factual findings section that details the impact of the tax cuts of 2001 and 2003 without altering the functional aspects of the bill. These findings include, 1, on January 8, 2003, White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer said that President Bush believed that the tax cut package enacted in 2001 and expanded in 2003 would, quote, create additional revenues for the federal government and pay for itself. 2, before the tax cuts of 2001 and 3 were enacted, the Congressional Budget Office projected gradually rising surpluses from 2.7% of gross national product in 2001 to 5.3% of gross national product in 2011, with federal government operating debt-free by 2009. We know this, of course, did not happen, and instead the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the tax cuts of 2001 and 3 have added over $2 trillion to budget deficits from 2002 to 11. Despite signing tax cuts of 2001 and 3 into law, President Bush's administration had, according to the Wall Street Journal, quote, the worst track record for job creation since the government began keeping records in 1939. From 2001 to 2009, gross domestic products grew at the slowest pace for any period since 1953, and median household income declined during the Bush administration for the first time since 1967, when this data first was tracked. We all have lived through this past decade and have seen the damaging effects the Bush tax cuts have had on our federal budget. I think it's safe to say that anyone who can possibly claim to belong to the reality caucus agrees that the Bush tax cuts not only contributed to taking our nation from budget surpluses to massive deficits, but also contributed to unprecedented levels of income inequality. If Congress cannot learn from past mistakes, we are destined to repeat them. I urge my colleagues to support my simple, factual amendment to show that Congress understands the true impact of the Bush tax cuts and recognize that while tax cuts might stimulate additional economic activity, the tax cuts of 2001 and 3 certainly did not pay for themselves. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a little amusing, I guess, that our colleagues on the other side love to talk about the past. I'm not sure whether it's a desire for fantasy or misery, but talking about the past is interesting. But this amendment has absolutely nothing to do with the legislation that's being considered. We don't need to rehash the economic record of the last 10 years. We need to look forward, and that's what this bill does. It's a forward-looking piece of legislation, and looking forward, as the CBO reported on Tuesday, is that if tax relief is allowed to expire at the end of this year, which seems to be what my colleagues on the other side are advocating, we would then have the largest tax increase in the history of our country. CBO says that economic growth will be as much as 3% lower than it would be if that tax relief were extended. So what we need is dynamic, appropriate scoring, more information, more data for our colleagues to be able to have that kind of information, so when they make decisions, they'll make, again, hopefully wiser decisions. This amendment truly makes no improvement whatsoever to our process, our budget process, and I urge its defeat and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, well, I find it interesting that the speaker from the other side believes that this is fantasy. This is facts, and he believes that facts should not be part of the debate, which is probably why we are in the trouble that we are in right now, when the majority party believes that opinions should not be weighed down by the facts of the situation. What I am offering in this statement is simply factual statements that don't detract in any way from this intended impact of this legislation, but it's certainly important to having a full and honest debate that we need to have an understanding of what happened in the past. If we do not have that understanding of the past, if we don't step up to the reality of what actually occurred as a result of missteps in public policy in the past, we will repeat them once again. What I'm hearing from the majority party is that they want to repeat the mistakes of the past, mistakes that led to uncontrollable deficits, and also mistakes that gave huge windfalls to the wealthiest people in this country at the expense of middle-class taxpayers. As a Democrat, we are very proud to stand up for middle-class families and want to make sure that tax benefits to middle-class taxpayers continue to go to those families that are struggling each and every day. On the other hand, the wealthiest among us, those with the highest incomes that have reaped the most benefit, should be paying their fair share. And by having tax cuts, what we will do is cut into those middle-class families. This is a factual statement. If we do not recognize the reality of the facts, we are doomed